I'm a white man who grew up in a low-income household and came through an urban public school system where I was an ethnic minority. Today, when people who don't know me beyond my demographics insist how easy my life has been and how privileged I am, I agree that I'm privileged, but not for the reason they think. The greatest privilege from which I benefited was not my white skin or male genitals, but the diversity of my growth environment. I had the privilege of direct experience with other kids from a mosaic of ethnic backgrounds. I regularly met new people all across the spectrums of skin tone, sexual orientations, and intellects. Even though half of my family was what I consider racist, my own experiences were too powerfully opposed to their bullshit for me to absorb their influence. I already had multiple encounters to prove that within every demographic, some people are consistently awesome, some are consistently assholes, and most are somewhere in between most of the time. For example, if the media showed me 3 different black men on 3 different occasions shooting and robbing white people, I already knew more black people than I could count on both hands who would never do such a thing, so my brain would refuse to assign causation to that correlation. I recognize most people don't get the opportunity to grow up in such a heterogeneous environment, and I'm grateful every day that I was privileged enough to have that experience. My social media feeds today contain an equally diverse group of people, including many I knew as a kid. The most disturbing among them are the group with whom I'm nearly prepared to cut ties. They are what feels like a growing group of ultra-woke black friends who have wrapped their entire identities into their skin tone in a way they never did or at least never expressed when we were kids. A painful amount of content they post isn't just pro-black, which is silly to me, but it's largely anti-white. Some of them are relatively innocuous on the scale of anti-white propaganda, and others aren't. They seem to take great pleasure in posting pictures and videos of unappealing food while leaving comments that credit such food to "da whites" for slang for the whites, or white peepo as a pejorative term for white people. Other times, they post stories of something crazy or stupid that a white person did and cite it as evidence that this is the kind of behavior we should expect from Caucasian people. Well, that's pretty tame and tolerable on the anti-white spectrum. It's tolerated and celebrated in their posts. Lots of people join in the fun and mockery of white people apparently being unaware that seasoning exists. Of course, I suspect that if I posted something similar, insulting black people based on a shallow stereotype, I would be considered a neo-Nazi smear on the face of humanity. Of course, I have no desire to inundate my social media followers with such posts, which is why I don't, but these people sure do have a desire to do it to white folks. I don't mention these because I find them personally offensive, but rather because this kind of hypocrisy makes it difficult to respect their own desire to not be generalized. It senselessly damages already fragile race relations, and the actual racist white people out there can't get enough of that stuff to rally more potential racists to their side. And to what end is this anti-white propaganda spread? What's to be gained from feeding the anti-black machine like this? As far as I can tell from interacting with them, it's just so people who consider themselves oppressed can feel a little better by generalizing their perceived oppressors. And it's justified because white racists do it to them. Then you have somewhat worse propaganda like this example. I remind you, this was publicly posted by black friends who considered it humorous and worth sharing for a laugh. Memes like this were circulating around Thanksgiving in various forms. This one depicts a young black man bringing his white girlfriend over for the holidays, and she wants to leave because she overheard his family insulting her by suggesting her lips are too small to eat. One friend of mine offered the additional caption, "Gotta love the shade that black moms and aunts throw," and based on the volume of posts like this he's made in recent years, it's clear he's not saying that as a sarcastic criticism of a flaw in the black community. He's celebrating that behavior. Could you imagine how the same people sharing this would respond if a white person posted a meme of the same girl bringing the same guy home, and with the guy wanting to leave because he overheard her white family asking how he could eat with those big lips? How about if the white person posting that meme captioned, "Gotta love the shade white moms and aunts throw"? When my friends make these first 2 levels of anti-progress divisive posts, I usually manage to just cringe past them without responding, because when you see as much of them as I do, you have to pick your battles. I want to show you an example of the kind of post I can't ignore, which is also the same kind that have me considering just giving up on such people. More importantly, I want you to see the interactions that took place among one of my super woke friends, his wife, and me on the post that he made. As you see, their names and pictures are covered. His boxes are white, mine are blue, and his wife's are pink. Here's the initial post, which was comically received and uncriticized on his Facebook page until I commented. The post asks readers to name something that scares white people, with an image of Chris Hansen, best known for his TV show that baits, catches, and exposes sexual predators. The text of this post alone is explicitly inflammatory. At its very least offensive, it opens the door for people to say, well, the same things that would scare anyone else, while any other response requires the typist to generalize about 1.3 billion people. Again, if we put this through the change white to black litmus test, this would easily be regarded as intensely racist. On top of the question itself, the image implies as directly as possible that white people fear the person who catches sexual predators. That implication is confirmed by my friend's answer, starting with, besides Chris Hansen. He then provides a list of what he thinks white people fear, which include black and brown people in elevators, at stoplights, and just in general. I'm assuming his experience as a black man have given him reason to believe that white people are generally afraid of people with his skin color, although we went to the same high school together, and you'd think his exposure to me and other white kids who attended every day apathetic of the black majority would have proven for him how absurd that is for at least a significant population of white people. It seems to me that he just feels good expressing his disgust with people who react to him in fear, while perhaps simultaneously bragging about his perceived intimidation over another ethnicity. The next fear on his list is seasoning, because insulting white people as stereotypically poor cooks just never gets old. Next, he lists closed Starbucks because he can't tell the difference between most Americans who love overpriced coffee being white and most white people loving overpriced coffee. He makes the same joke and the same mistake by finishing his list of white fears with gluten. If it isn't clear, posts like this are counterproductive to combating racism. Black people who feel oppressed by white people and think insulting them with negative stereotypes is going to reduce said oppression are sorely mistaken. That's the major reason I've responded to things like this. Not because they hurt my feelings, but because black people making blanket insults to white people, particularly without accompanying those insults with substantial arguments or commentary, is harmful to the black people. The trouble is that it seems to feel so good to lash out against the people you think are hurting you. Even if it makes things worse for you by turning otherwise neutral majority members into your enemies, a lot of people think it's worth it if they can just get a laugh at the expense of their perceived enemy. In reality, this is like using steel wool to scratch at a scab that itches because it's trying to heal. I realized something important in the following comment exchange with my friend's wife that has led me to believe that it's probably time I stop trying to be a voice of reason when my friends make and share such self-destructive posts. So let's evaluate the exchange, and maybe you can contribute your thoughts on whether it's worth me continuing to try to reason with such people or not. I opened by appealing to my friend's logic. As I've done several times before, I implored him to consider how he would feel if, say, ignorant rednecks made a similar post about black people. His wife expressed that it, quote, never fails, end quote, referring to me challenging posts like this. Again, there's plenty of anti-white propaganda that he and mutual friends in our circle post, to which I don't even respond at all. My friend's defense was to tell me to just open a book and I would see face products and movies made by white folks that depict black people in a terrible light. He said what most white people would apparently say to him by telling me to stop being so sensitive. Apparently, the majority of books indicate that face products and movies made by white people depict black people negatively. While I consider this a mostly antiquated complaint, I can acknowledge that some modern media still depicts black people negatively, but I'd argue that swings both ways at this point. The nerdy white virgin, evil British villain, and dorky white dad tropes find themselves in film and series just as much as, if not more, as the stereotypical negative black characters. At any rate, my friend's rebuttal, even if accurate, is a failure to understand that two wrongs don't make a right. If you don't like when people stereotype you and write you off as an overly sensitive person when you express your disagreements, then don't do it to other groups of people. If you want to see change, you have to be better than the things you're criticizing, not replicate them. It's noteworthy that his wife told me, "Don't even explain yourself. Let him wonder." And he agreed. As you see, my friend didn't answer my question. I find it odd that he believes white people have powerful privilege which they use to oppress his people, yet when a white person seeks explanation for his cathartic outlashes, he doesn't want to have a dialogue. His wife doesn't even want black people explaining their thoughts to white people. They'd rather have white people see their anti-white propaganda and just be confused and insulted rather than understand their points. That sounds like somebody who has no argument and or really just wants things to stay the same. I reminded my friend that my actual question was how he would feel if the same thing were done to him rather than by him. This is Empathy 101, a thought experiment putting yourself in another's shoes. The two of us should be seeking to understand one another. I even explained how I would feel and what I would do because I would call someone out who did something like this if his ethnicity were the target. It's pretty explicit at this point that I am an ally seeking to understand. Is there some fair rationale behind what I consider hypocrisy? But I never got an answer. His wife took over the conversation from there, and look at the advice that she gave me. She told me to make an anti-black version of the same anti-white propaganda. She is literally asking for the white person to make anti-black propaganda rather than having a conversation about the anti-white propaganda she's celebrating. Of course, completely misinterpreting my question, she says that my white tears are endless, as if my entire objection here is based on my feelings being hurt, though I never said or suggested they were. This is the embodiment of prioritizing how good it can feel to insult your perceived enemy. It must feel so satisfying that you're willing to turn your ally into your enemy just so you can insult a white person. For those of you who are unaware, these kinds of people exist who consider white tears or any time a white person is offended an occasion worthy of celebration. Beyond the memes about it, there's a particular gif of a black girl indulgently sipping a glass of water labeled "white people tears" that people just love to post when white people object to something, even if it's a reasonable objection. People wear t-shirts with that shit on it because it feels so good for them to frustrate or otherwise offend white people at any cost. Also, yes, far-left feminists do this with male tears too, which is the same problem, but that's a whole other branch of this gnarly tree that we're just barely trimming here. I think the point is that they feel like these people in advantaged positions have no right to cry or whine or complain about anything, so if they do, they're going to celebrate it. Oh yes, and my other option from her apart from making anti-black propaganda, if I have a problem with her anti-white propaganda, was for me to shut the fuck up. How progressive. Way to create a space and open up a dialogue. I tried to explain that her suggestion doesn't make sense, that I don't want to see any ethnicity being negatively depicted or stereotyped, and we should move past this. She again told me to shut the fuck up and deal. I also asked if she was interested in decreasing racism. That evoked her onslaught of pre-canned talking points that didn't match anything I said. You'll notice that in this video and in these screenshots, I've never once called this anti-white propaganda racist. For the record, I think it is, but I never said it specifically so that we could have a conversation about the issue rather than getting bogged down with her explaining how, as a white person, I'm racist no matter what, and as a black person, it's impossible for her to be racist no matter what, based on her cherry-picked sociology definition of racism. Even though I never accused her of racism, she launched into her minorities can't be racist spiel anyway. I've addressed that entire issue in a separate video available on the video screen and in the description. She then concluded that racism is never going to end, and I can be optimistic about it because I'm white and I don't have to deal with it how black people do. As with most internet interactions, even though I went to school with this woman's husband, I haven't spoken with him in person in over a decade, and she's never met me. That's why the assumptions she put out next are particularly cringe-inducing. So enjoy your privilege and shut the fuck up whining all the goddamn time like you're really out here trying to dismantle some shit. I won't get into how humorous it is that she accused me of that, but it's sufficient to point out that for all she knows, I could be someone who's devoted my entire life to helping black Americans. But because I'm white and find her propaganda negative, she's comfortable acting on the assumption that I live a luxurious existence casually sipping the nectar of white privilege. To people like this, it really doesn't matter who the white people that they're interacting with are or what they do. They're just all evil collectively. Also, there are very few white people who are going to be inspired to go out and help you or change their behavior to benefit you as a result of you talking to them that way. She declared that racism will never end, as if it's a switch that's either on or off. That's why I asked if she was interested in decreasing racism, not ending it. Most understand that racism exists on a spectrum that could be drastically lowered or dramatically increased, and the senseless ongoing division of races is only going to make things worse. But there's a part of me that thinks that that's what she and people who talk like this desire, because they're so comfortable with the victim role. She ended that comment with, "And let this be the last time you address me." She has no interest in a dialogue, only speaking and never listening. She doesn't want to address actual points, and when she's done with her cathartic screaming, she wants the person who's listening to just wallow in silent guilt. In addition to some of those points I just made, I indicated that when I asked her about her interest in decreasing racism, I wasn't calling her racist. I was trying to explain that her behavior toward white people is only going to inspire more racism against black people. I explained that she was unfortunately too hung up on my skin color to learn anything from the conversation. She chose to interpret that as me being a stereotypical, tired-ass white dude with nothing better to do than troll Facebook, thinking I'm omnipotent white messiah with knowledge for the ignorant black folk. That very sentence proves she doesn't know what trolling means, but when you act upon assumptions for how and what other people think, rather than what they've actually expressed, you risk damaging your cause if you're wrong about what exactly that person's thoughts and motivations are. And unless you're psychic, there's a high chance you don't know what that other person's actually thinking. Even if I were some condescending white messiah wannabe, what's with all this hostility? As annoying as it is when someone from outside of my field assumes they know how to do my job better than I do and tries to give me advice on it even though they don't have the level of expertise or experience that I do, as people often do in my field, by the way, I never assume that those people do so with malice, and when possible, I work to educate them rather than telling them to shut the fuck up and get the fuck out of here. If I did that, I would only confirm any negative preconceptions about my field that they already have. If I'm trying to help you, even if I'm wrong and I'm willing to have a dialogue with you, why are you shutting it down? The cynical part of me fears that people this far gone are just so comfortable with the tattered skin of the victim that they actually want things to stay bad or get worse. It seems to me that she prefers a racist world where she never has to build arguments or address her opponent on equal footing when she can simply point out how marginalized she is and pat herself on the back. I tried explaining to her that in a standard civil conversation, people listen to each other, share ideas, and learn from each other, especially when they have different perspectives to offer. Her method of writing off someone because of his race and smothering him in straw men while deliberately ignoring everything he has to say is a pretty effective way of stopping a conversation from being productive for her. She stopped responding with words at that point, and I bowed out of yet another internet argument, accepting that it was pointless to continue. You can see another example from another Facebook interaction here, where a black woman was blaming white America for voting in Trump because white America hated Obama so much. You know, the same white America that gave Obama 2 terms. As you see here, all I did was point out that about half the country didn't even vote, meaning only about 35% of white Americans voted for Trump. I didn't even get into the absurdity of her assuming that the exclusive motivation for white Trump supporters was racism or even a disdain for Obama. By simply pointing out that 35% of a group isn't a fair amount to generalize the entire group, she accused me of being fragile. I'd show you the rest of our interaction, but when I responded to this, she terminated the conversation by threatening to block me if I dared to respond to the rest of her rhetoric. I did respond, and block me she did. For the record, this was a friend of a friend who I'd never met or had in my social media circle, but she blocked me. Ironically, it's not people who politely voice their disagreements who are fragile. Fragile describes people who are so opposed to criticism that they block anyone who politely disagrees. I suppose I'm going to the trouble of sharing all this with you in the interest of hope. I realize hope is ultimately the only thing that's kept me flinging myself back into these exchanges over the years, taking the verbal or written lashings from people who don't know me and don't want my help while I watch them make matters worse for themselves. My hope is that some sliver of that population will see or hear this and change their tactics. I'm not delusional enough to believe that we're going to end racism, especially not through social media arguments and YouTube videos, but if we seek to understand each other a little more and move away from these screaming matches, no matter how good they may feel, we may be able to muster some realistic improvement.